Sweet people. Hi, sweet people. We're in front of my home bakery. You can see my sign from my old store, Gesine Confectionery, that was in Montpelier, Vermont. That was years ago. Now I just bake. I have my own home bakery where I do my testing and write my books, and I wanted to invite you in so I could show you how to make croissant. You see, we're outside. You can hear cars. So come on in and let's get started. Come on. So here we are. And I wanted to show you the pantheon of croissant. And I will show you different techniques for doing different things if we have time to do them all. But here's a traditional croissant, open crumb structure, lovely. Here we have, whoopee, here we have a cronut, which we probably won't demo today, but it's just a fried version. Here are little cronut donut holes. Now here's one of my husband's all-time favorite, pain au chocolat, chocolate croissant. And this is what I call scrap tart. I'll show you what to do with all those errant pieces of croissant dough as you're cutting. You think this is such a waste. It's not. You can make something really tasty out of it. So first let's discuss something really intimidating, laminated doughs and laminated yeasted doughs, which is what we're making. Now if you want to start off more slowly, I have a Craftsy class on puff pastry that takes you through quick puff first, which is almost more like a pie dough technique, and then goes through to traditional puff pastry, which is a laminated dough, unyeasted, and then you kind of work your way into croissant and Danish, which are yeasted laminated doughs, and kouign-amann as well. But if you really just want to jump in, if you're familiar with puff pastry, or if you just like, the hell with it, let's just do it. Let's just make some croissant, okay? So I'm going to start with the butter block, or it's also in French called barrage. And I use a little European butter, and I use some just regular old grocery store butter. Why? Because I was being El Cheapo and didn't want to spend, I didn't want to use all European butter. It's a little more expensive. But I gotta say, like Land O'Lakes is now doing a European butter that's 82% butterfat, and it's not as expensive as some of the other stuff, so it's kind of exciting, so you can kind of go crazy. But you know, the European butter tends to, well, it has more butterfat, but it tends to be a little softer too. It's a little easier to work with, so using a combination of the two is really nice to make a great barrage or butter block. I use a little flour, and I'm gonna put this recipe on G-Bakes once we're done. And so that you have all the ratios in front of you. And I do everything in grams. So just be prepared that you'll need a scale. So a little flour, and what flour does is it is hygroscopic, and it starts absorbing some of the moisture in the butter, making it more pliable because we're going to roll it out. And then we roll it out first, we put it into a block, and then we roll it out in between two little sheets of dough. It's laminated in between the dough. That's why it's called laminated dough. So now we're going to, I'm doing this backwards, it's like Ginger Rogers in the bakery. So this is something that I show my students at King Arthur Flour because we use these KitchenAid same mixers. You clip it on, and then there's a little lock in the back. You press it down. If you don't...
Lori wants to know if Kerrygold butter works for croissant.
Lori wants to know if Kerrygold butter works. If you've ever used Kerrygold butter, you'll notice that it's really, really soft. Now, I have used it in laminated doughs, and it's gorgeous. The one thing I would caution you is, because it is so soft, it's a little hard to work with because you want a very specific consistency. Watch, I'm going to lift this up now. Whoop! And now I'm going to start it. So in that case, I would definitely do a mix of the two butters. Unless you want to go all Kerrygold, which I actually have done, and it was a gorgeous dough. I just had to keep putting it back in the refrigerator just to make sure that the temperature was perfect. And you'll see as we go along what exactly that means, what the temperature and the consistency of the butter should be, what the temperature and the consistency of your dough should be. So, the answer, short answer, yes. Long answer is, you just have to be very careful. So if there are any other questions, please ask. That's why we're here. We're live. Can you freeze laminated dough? Yes, you can freeze laminated dough. Sorry, it's going to get loud. You can freeze the dough, but I'll tell you what my preference is. My preference is to make, I'm doing this backwards, I'm confused, is to make the dough, roll out, bake off, And then freeze once the croissants have cooled. You can par bake, which means that they don't get full color, but they get set. Or you can fully bake so that they get their full color. And then if you freeze them right after they've cooled, that's how I do it when I know I'm having guests and I won't have time to make croissant. I will freeze the finished croissant. But you can freeze laminated dough. You just have to be careful about thawing it properly and slowly. It's a very slow thaw process in the refrigerator. So I have a piece of parchment here that I folded in half, and a little less than an inch I folded up. And this is going to be the size of my butter block. And I do this as my guide. And now I'm going to, one thing I don't have is a spoon. I'll be right back. Just stay here for a second. Here we go. You'll see that I wanted to show you, this is my notebook that I use to test all my recipes, and you can see all these notes. Ray drew a little croissant doodle in there as I was working because he's an artist and also a graffiti artist. So you can see just the process that I've been making croissant for way too long, and I've been changing my recipe as I'm like, I want this to change and I want that to change, and I finally settled on this one as my recipe. And if you look at other recipes, I recommend you try, if you're really curious about croissant and you've got time on your hands, try other recipes. Many of the techniques I'm showing you translate to every other recipe so that you will be more knowledgeable about reading them and using them. And it's fun to see how different bakers feel about, like in Montreal, bakers tend to make a croissant with a little more tooth. Not that shattery, flaky, when you go to Paris where it just like crumbles and starts flaking the second you put it in your mouth. I like a little bit in between. I like a lot of flake, but I also like to have a little bit of tooth. So mine is kind of in between that. But we'll be learning techniques that will take you through most recipes when you read them, so you'll be familiar with what all the lingo is. So now we're doing the barrage, which is the butter block. And traditionally, I do the dough first and then the butter block. But since we have to let the dough rest for much longer than the butter block, and I already have a finished one in the refrigerator, I'm going to do this first for our purposes. And then I'm going to demo the dough. And the dough that I'm going to demo, we couldn't use right away. So this will get nice and cool while we demo, and then I have a resting dough in the fridge. So I just spread it out as neatly as I can, but it doesn't need to be perfect at this point, right? So what I'm going to do is just kind of go up, not all the way to the edge. Well, this time I did. Try not to have any big air bubbles. And get all that butter, right? And then I fold that in half. See? So that's about 8 by 11, I think, is the butter block. And then I fold this over like this. And then I have my tape ready. Tape it down. Any questions, please ask. This is the barrage or the butter block that goes in the center. I put flour in mine. Some people don't in their croissant. What it does is it gives it pliability and ease of use, and so that it rolls more smoothly as you do your lamination. That's why I do it. Because the flour absorbs excess moisture in the butter and just makes it easier to work. Now, if you've ever done an inverse puff pastry where the barrage is on the outside of the dough, that's one of those instances where adding flour is a must. You must, because if you think about it, if the butter's on the outside and you're rolling out with butter on the outside, you want to make sure that it's pliable, that it's not too goopy, and the flour really helps with that. So now I have my little package, and I'm going to grab. I know this might seem a little excessive, but if you want great lamination, really even layers, great rise, I really suggest just taking your time doing these little steps to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. because you can always like look back and go, you know, I should have been a little more persnickety about how I was doing my butter block. Just start from the beginning. It's so, like, you've got saran wrap, you've got this stuff at home. No big whoop. Just do it. So now, and the reason I put saran wrap around it is that I don't want, if for some reason there's a gap in there in the parchment, I don't want it squeezing out. So now I roll it out and I make sure that I get that butter to the very edge. I do my edges first and I make sure. The nice thing about European butter, it's a little more yellow too because of the fat content. So you can see it more readily when you're working with it when it's wrapped in parchment. Pretty cool, huh? Any questions, please ask. We're making barrage for croissant, which is the butter block that we're going to roll the dough in. So I do a couple passes. I tend to be a lopsided human being, so I want this to be as even as possible. So if I had a level right now, I probably would use it. And I'm going to put this on a shelf in my refrigerator, usually about 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll show you what the consistency should be. Let it get nice and cool. Don't put it on a shelf that isn't flat, otherwise you'll get ribbed butter and you want it to be as flat as possible. So putting it in the fridge. And I'm back. So that was our butter block. And so traditionally, as I said before, we would be making that after we did our dough block. But since I have one already in the fridge resting for about 2 hours, I wanted that getting nice and cool before we take our resting dough block out. So now we're going to make our dough. And this is called a détrempe in French. You can just say dough. It's a lot easier. And I'm going to add, as I said, I'm doing all this in grams. And I like grams because they're a smaller unit of measure than ounces, so everything can be far more precise. And if you've got a good scale, everyone toggles between ounces and grams. So that should not be a problem. So I'm going to use 150 grams of whole milk. And I'm going to tell you something that might confuse you, but we need to discuss it. I scalded my milk, which means I held it at a temperature over 190 degrees for a few minutes to get rid of an enzyme called, what is it called, glutathione, which is an enzyme that impedes gluten production. It's a minimal thing. You don't have to do that. I just do it because I am persnickety. You know that by now. But you don't have to. Question?
Kathleen wants to know if you can freeze the butter block to make it cold faster.
No, and I'll tell you why. Because
Can you repeat the question?
oh, so it was Kathleen?
Yeah.
Kathleen wants to know if you can freeze the butter block to make it get cold faster. No, and I'll tell you why. Because I know that's like your first thing is like, I want this to go faster. Because you want a very specific temperature and pliability of butter. So if you put it in the freezer, the outside's going to get really hard and the inside will stay softer, or it might just freeze through, and then you couldn't use that butter at all. What you want is a nice, cool butter packet that when you lift off the parchment, it holds its shape, but it's still bendable. It has to be pliable. If it were too hard, as you roll out the butter, in between the layers of dough, it'll start shattering. That's what we call it, shattering, where you start seeing like little gaps between the dough and the butter, and then the dough adheres to each other, and you don't have lamination. So you want lamination, you want the butter cool, not cold. You also don't want it warm. If it's too warm, as you're laminating, the butter will start melting into the dough. The flour in the dough will start absorbing the butter, and then you won't get that great lift, because the lift comes from the moisture evaporating from the butter in between the layers, and you want a distinctive layer for that to happen. It's persnickety, right? So that's why we're kind of going to go through, and I want you to ask questions because it's confusing. And I want to demystify this whole process because it's actually really fun, as long as you don't, screw it up and then you're crying for days. So I'm adding 300 grams of room temperature water. Oh, going back to the milk, I scalded mine to get rid of that glutathione enzyme, which impedes the production of gluten just a little, but it's not such a big deal that you even have to bother doing it. I just do it because it's what I I kind of was raised doing, so you don't worry about it. I added 300 grams of water. And one of the things you're going to learn about croissant dough is that there is a hydration level of it, the amount of moisture in the dough itself. My base recipe runs at about 56% hydration. And I will show you how to do this math. If you're looking at a croissant recipe and you were like, I wonder what the hydration is, you take the amount of moisture of liquids, and that would be both the milk and the water. So that's 150 plus 300, which is 450. Math. As the English would say, maths. And then you divide that by the amount of flour. In baker's math, in baker's formula, flour equals 100% of the whole formula. Okay, that's really confusing, but you don't have to know that for now. So what we're going to do, 450, which is the weight of the water, divide that into 800, which is the amount, oh, no, that's a lot of something. Let's do that. 450 divided by 800 equals 56. So 56%. Then you times it by 100, but we're smart. We can see that there's a 56 there. That means 56%. Now, that's my base recipe. If it's really humid out, in the winter sometimes here it's really humid, I stick to that. We've been in a drought lately, so I have a feeling that I'm going to need a little more moisture. To me, up to 60% hydration for me is a little high. It makes the dough a little too goopy and hard to work with, and I don't get as much lift. But when it's really dry outside, you'll notice that sometimes as you're making the dough, you'll see it needs it, and you're like, I think I have to add this right now. So I'm going to hold this aside. The highest I would go to 60% hydration is adding 30 more grams, and all of this stuff is going to be in the post that I'm going to publish after this class. So that's 800 grams of flour. Remember, that's in the baker's formula. That would be 100% of the whole. So confusing. 100 grams of sugar. And I don't know if you've ever seen in some recipes, barley malt is added. So 100 grams is a pretty high percentage of sugar, but I like that. It really is great for caramelization, for flavor. You can add a little barley malt. I wouldn't do a 1-to-1 swap. I did it for one of them. It just comes out too dark, and the dough comes out a little too sticky when you work with it. It's not horrible, but I would prefer a little more sugar than the barley malt. Then we're going to add 18 grams of instant yeast. And instant yeast is fantastic because you add it straight to the flour. You don't bloom it. It's incredibly consistent. Most commercial bakeries use instant yeast because of its consistency, great storage capacity, great shelf life, all these things. Readily available now at grocery stores. But you can also buy, I use Red Star yeast. It's available at King Arthur Flour and most stores. Now I'm going to use Baker's Special Dry Milk, which is milk powder. Now you can use milk powder that you get in the store, but I warn you that the milk powder you get in the store is often not this fine. Sometimes it's got those really huge granules, which you don't want. There are, the one in the box has the big granules. There's one that's almost in a plastic envelope that has really lovely texture. This is Baker's Special because it is heated, as was the scalded milk, to a higher temperature so that that enzyme glutathione is eradicated, and so that it doesn't impede gluten production, and it creates higher loaves. It does indeed, but that doesn't mean that if you don't use it that you won't get a lovely loaf. You will. And then I add some baker's salt. You can use regular old sea salt. Fine. Use fine. Don't use the big old kosher chunks. So this one's actually very pretty, and you can see it when it's going in. Woo! So I'm going to stir this up first. You want to be careful. I should have used a bigger bowl, come to think of it.
So Karen kind of came in late, but she wanted to know what brand of butter you use.
Today I used a combo. When I went to the... Oh, yes, so the question is what kind of butter did I use? I used a combo today. I used Cabot, regular old butter. They also make a European butter. So half Cabot, and then half, I found Land O'Lakes European butter. It was very cool. So I used that half. It's 82% butter fat. I used a combination of the two. So now I'm going to add this in here. snort from the husband over there. So, and then I've got 50 grams of soft butter, which adds tenderness. The other thing that milk and the dry milk do, they are tenderizers. So they give that really, really nice mouthfeel. And this is where I get that kind of nice cross between that kind of earth-shatteringly crispy croissant and that more heartier mouthfeel of the Montreal croissant, that both the fats and in the milk and the sugar proteins tend to do that. You'll see some recipes that have leaner recipes, and leaner means not so much fat or sugar. That creates a really lovely croissant too, a little more crispy. So you just have to decide what your preference is, and I really recommend that you play with the recipes. This is not the be-all, end-all recipe, but the techniques are similar in each, usually they're similar in each of the recipes. So now I'm going to weigh out 30 grams more of water. So that will get me up to 60% hydration. I might not use it all. I'm going to watch my dough come together and see how dry it is, because we've been in a bit of a drought here in our area, making for really dry baking conditions. And I know this is incredibly frustrating for you when you're making breads, pizza dough, anything that has like the specific amount of hydration or water in the recipe, and then they give you the instruction, add more or less, and you're like, dude, what does that mean? It means you just have to get used to what the dough looks like and your expectations of the dough. So what I want is I want a firm, I don't want a slack dough in this. What? Are we getting a... If I what?
You're going to do a stopping with the grapes.
Yeah, yes. I can't breathe. Thanks, Dory. Thanks a lot, Dory, for bringing in the comedy. So it's looking shaggy. What I'm seeing right now is a shaggy dough, and I know that it's going to need, I mean, this isn't it. It's going to go for a while longer. It's going to come together more. So it could need a skosh more water. I'm seeing it's taking a while to really incorporate. But you know, as the dough works, it's going to get smoother and smoother and smoother and start hydrating more and more, because flour takes a while to absorb moisture, and it continues to do so. And so I'm looking at it, I'm going, this might be okay. This could be good. And you'll read in different recipes. So you know, when you do that mirror test with things like brioche or a cinnamon roll, it's like you pull the dough when it's nice and smooth, and you want to be sure that it doesn't tear and that you can pull it thin enough that you can kind of see through as if it were a window. You can see light come through. In this case, I like my sturdier dough. It doesn't need to be up to that point. You don't have to work it so hard, because as we're laminating by hand, we're going to continue working that dough and working that gluten so that it gets that lovely shine to the dough and the structure that we need to make lovely croissants. But you still, if you look at it right now, it's still at that point where it's knobby, not shaggy anymore, but I do want it smoother than this. Cecilia wants to know where I got my apron. I was teaching at Southern Seasons in Richmond, and I think this one might be from Chapel Hill. I don't know what the brand is, but that's where I got it. Here, that's the go online. Okay, apron.
Nancy wants to know if you use tap water.
I use my own tap. We have well water that we get tested every year for the bakery, so that's what I use. But I suggest that if you have any questions about your own water source, please use spring water or filtered water for this. You might have noticed in some recipes they recommend mineral water, and that is probably because it wants you to use a clean source of moisture. So I would go a little longer. 4 or 5 minutes usually is like the timing on my dough. And you want it to clean off the sides of the bowl, and sometimes if there's a little left on the bottom, that's fine, but it's going to be a hearty dough and it needs to rest. Which way? So this right now is still, you can see how it's still shaggy. This is too shaggy for me. I want it to be a little smoother. But I have one in the fridge that's lovely. That's waiting. You see how that's a little shaggy. It doesn't need to do the mirror test. This one really won't do the mirror test. But it does need to be a little smoother than that. So like 4 or 5 minutes. As you're working it through lamination, it will build more structure as well. I have found that if you're using a sheeter, the likelihood of you having a sheeter at home is probably goose egg. But there's a sheeter that commercial bakeries use that is the most magnificent thing ever. It literally rolls out the dough, you sheet it through. It's like a pasta maker. You sheet it through, and then you do the folds. You sheet it through again. And it turns out when you use a sheeter, it does minimal handling of the dough. So in that case, if you were a princess and had a sheeter in your home, you would work it until it was pretty smooth, like you would a traditional like brioche dough. But in this case, it doesn't need to be perfect. At this point, I will put it on, well, I'll show you, a sheet pan sprayed with oil, sprayed again, and then cover. So I'm going to bring out my resting dough. I'll be right back. I'm also going to give my butter a feel. My butter needs a little more time. So while we're rolling this out, I will give it the time it needs to be happy. So what you want when you have the butter and the dough is a pretty mutual consistency between the two. They should feel alike. They should be of relative temperature. Dough will never, in the refrigerator, get super hard like a butter might. So that's why you make at home, you'd make your dough first, let it rest. It needs those 2 hours to rest for the gluten to relax so that you can work with it. I do not bulk proof my croissant dough. I find that it gets too bready for my taste. And you've seen that if you put it in a nice Cambro and it gets big and puffy. Question, yes?
Naoko wants to know, what KitchenAid speed are you kneading the dough?
Low, 1 or 2.
She said it looks slow. Does it matter if you knead the dough fast or slow?
I just find that it's a little. Oh, the question is, does it matter what speed you knead the dough on? I find it a little abusive to go too soon, to go slap happy. It's like, ah. I also can watch it more, and it gives me time to be at one with my dough. With a bigger mixer, a KitchenAid is usually speed 1, on a smaller one, speed 2 or 3. It really, the motors are a bit different. But I like to do it low and slow.
Magdalena has a question.
Magdalena, ask a question.
Would I need to add some more water to get the dough to be smoother, or just need it?
To get it, so the question is, would you add more water to make the dough smoother? Yes and no. So yes, adding a little more water will make it smoother. You might not need it. You might just need the patience of working the dough, because the flour absorbs moisture as it goes. I found that there might have been an opportunity to add a little more water to that dough, but I saw that as it was coming together, it was going to smooth out and start absorbing the moisture that it needed. If you add too much water, you can't take it back, and you're going to get a goopy dough that's not going to have a good rise and structure. And it's also going to be very hard to work with, because you will see, you are going to notice, I did not put any flour down just now. I'm going to work my dough without flour. And what that does is that allows for the layers to be distinct without any impediment of that extra flour coming in. I find that if you want professional croissant at home, that you are not going to use flour during this process. Now, this is a really annoying sound. Now, if you find that it's too sticky because you don't want any tears in your dough, and if that's happening and you're like, I have to use a little flour, use a little flour, but always have on hand, not that, this. Have a dry brush that's really big. You can use a paintbrush too, just don't tell anybody. And before you do any work, before you do any fold, a lock-in, brush off your dough first so you get all the excess flour off, because it really tends to impede great lamination. So, and this is like, if you want to go for your best croissant ever, this is what you do. So right now, you're going to notice that I have These tape marks, we're ignoring them for now because I'm just doing what's called the lock-in next.
Karen wants to know, most of us don't have a stainless steel rolling surface. So if we don't use flour, what surface is best to roll?
So if you don't have a stainless steel rolling surface and you don't have a marble surface, which is actually superior, what you can do is you can mist a little bit of nonstick cooking spray on whatever surface you do have. Just a really, really light mist. And that really works well. So I'm going to grab my butter. This is the butter block we made. You and me, we made this together. I'm going to unwrap it. And hopefully, this will be the right temperature. I wanted it to shape up a little in the fridge. So the test is, and if it doesn't work, then that'll be a learning lesson for all of us, won't it? You needed more time. So here we go. This parchment should come off relatively cleanly. It shouldn't stick if we have the right temperature, and that's a nice test. The other thing you want to make sure that when you have the butter block, that it bends. Here, let's do it this way. It bends without breaking, like comedy. Butter and comedy, very similar. So all those stand-ups out there will know what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we have the butter block. So our hope here, oh yeah, look. It's peeling off nicely. Little chunks coming off, we can do that. So it should be able to handle well. Could have gone a little cooler, I can feel that, but you know what? We're going live.
Do it live.
We're doing it live. We're doing this live, guys. Peel that puppy off.
Lauren has a question. Is there any hope for a nice laminated dough without gluten?
It could be, you could have. So the question is there any hope for a nice laminated dough without gluten? You can get a meh dough without gluten. I can promise you a meh dough. But I'm talking about gluten a lot in this because it has so much to do with the structure and the rise and all the good stuff about it. But you know what? I don't discount technology coming up with something like fabulous to save those with celiac. And I'm so sorry when you can't have gluten. It really stinks. But it'll never be as good. I'm sorry. Never, never, ever. So I'm going to spread this just a little more so that it reaches the edges a little better. And if there are like any big holes in there. But you know what? Let's go back to gluten. If you're going to use a gluten-free flour, there are some that are superior to others. There is Cup for Cup, which is the Thomas Keller flour. I went to a bakery and I'm going to have to make this a little. I want this to flip over and reach the other side. I thought I was so smart rolling it out before seeing my butter. This is why you should have your butter block out so you can kind of guesstimate where it should go. Anyway, pizza, Boulder. Two guys who used to work for Thomas Keller made some of the best gluten-free pizza I've ever had in my life. And my assumption there is that they use Cup for Cup. And now King Arthur Flour is making a very similar Cup for Cup kind of thing. It's called Measure for Measure. Goodness. Which is fantastic. It's fantastic, and it is one of those things that you literally don't have to add any extra gums to it for it to work. I'm locking this in. This is called the lock-in. So what does butter do when you squish it? It squishes out. You want to keep the butter inside. So this is a lock-in. You'll see ones where they do a square piece of dough, and then they have a square, smaller butter, and then they kind of diamond shape the butter on top, and then they seal it 4 ways. I like this better. Fewer seams, fewer overlaps of dough where you get like really thick dough. I have found that for me, superior. But I do always suggest that you try other techniques to see what you like best, because I'm not you. You're not me. I don't judge. I judge all the time. I'm lying. I judge all the time. Okay, so this is why I have my little tape marks. I'm going to roll this out, and I do use my fingers at this point, just to see how lovely that is. Really nice dough. And you can see that it hasn't totally manifested best structure because you can see there's a little stretchiness here, this little breaky poos, that if it were a dough that you had worked for a long time in the mixer where it got nice and smooth and had that gorgeous structure, this would be cleaned up a little. But see how much I'm working this stuff? The theory is that by the time we're done, it's going to be just as if you had completely done a wonderful job in the mixer. And this won't overwork the dough. Sometimes you'll see little air bubbles. You want to pop that out? Every once in a while, lift your dough and be patient. If you're working in a really hot kitchen and you feel like there's butter squishing out, or you can just feel that it's too soft, or right now my dough feels cool to the touch. It's really nice. If that starts going away, pick this puppy up, put it on a sheet pan, and put it in the refrigerator until you're happy. One thing you don't want to do is forget that it's in there so that the butter hardens, because what's going to happen is that when you start rolling it out again, the butter will shatter, it will splinter, and won't stay a uniform block of butter, which is what you want for great lamination. And this measurement is 15 by 22, and you want to hit that mark because in order to get the right amount of lift and layers, my calculation for my recipe is that you have to roll it out to 15 by 22, and that's what you do. Just do what I say. Other recipes are different. This is what I do. Some recipes just say, you know, roll it out to 1/8 of an inch thick. I'm like, you know what, dude? Be more specific, please. Like in a circle? No, because you're not specifying rectangle, what size. Da-da. Da-da. Patience. And every once in a while, lift it up to make sure that there's no butter. There's a little errant butter over there. I'll show you what I'm going to do with that. So keep working it. Any questions? Please ask. I'm here for your asking pleasure. Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? So I'm rolling this out. We have a question?
Robin asked, what's your rolling pin made of?
My rolling pin is made out of wood. What kind? I don't know. My husband bought this for me at Simon Pierce. And it's a French pin. You can see the tapered edges, which is my preferred pin. You can use whatever kind of pin you like. But if anybody knows what kind of wood this is, bluish in color, pipe in. Please tell us. You can see I'm getting little breakages where the butter's coming through, but we can fix that in lamination. You could add a little flour to get rid of that because it's not too pretty. But what I'm going to show you is what we're going to do. We're almost there. Okay, so we're pretty much there. Here's my process. Now this is called fold and turn, fold and turn. We're going to do 3 folds and turns. And I use a combination of them. I do 2 letter folds, 1 book fold. And in between the folds, I let this rest for 20 minutes to a half hour. No more, otherwise the butter will harden too much. No less, otherwise the gluten hasn't had time to relax. So make sure you've got a day to do this where you're relaxing and you have a timer and you're paying attention. So we're not going to be able to do 1 fold after the other because we need those rests. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what the folds look like, and that's it. So for a letter fold, you take this end of the dough towards the middle, like folding a business letter, which is not what anybody does anymore, it's just email, but pretend you're in Mad Men. And then you...
Randy's asking what the ideal amount of layers. Is that what you're doing now?
Yes, I'm making the layer structure now. I mean, it is up to you. This has, for me, made the ideal amount of lift and layer. If you laminate too much, you're creating too thin a butter structure, and then you won't have any lift. It'll pretty much disappear into the dough. Too little, and the dough will be too thick. You won't have laminated well enough. That's why you want to make sure all the temperatures are right. And you'll notice that sometimes if you don't do a great lamination, the butter will start seeping out of the dough. That can also happen if the temperature of your oven is too low, because ovens are all liars. All liars. Always have a thermometer in your oven because they all lie. So now we're going to do 2 of those. Letter fold, right? And then when you get it out of the refrigerator where you let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes, you turn, and this is called the turn, fold and turn. You turn it so the length is facing you. I'm not going to roll it out again because it hasn't had its rest, but just imagine I'm going to do the same size, 15 by 22, and that rest will allow you to roll it out well. If you find that the dough is fighting you, that it's shrinking back, wrap it up again, put it in the refrigerator. Always wrap it up. You don't want a skin on your dough. And let it rest until it's ready to go, not so long that the butter hardens too much. So you want to do 2 of that, 2 of those letter folds. Always turn. We'd roll it out, another letter fold. And then the very last fold, we rolled it out again. It is called a book fold. So you do it a little closer, and then like that. Right? And then you fold it again. It's actually, let's do it a little closer here. Now you don't want the seam straight down the middle because that'll create some weird gaps. And so before I start folding again, I kind of pinch this part together, and sometimes I'll roll it together, and then you fold that over, and that is a book fold. And you can still see here the structure of the dough hasn't developed as beautifully as it would after 3 of these turn and fold, turn and fold, turn and fold. So do you understand? Turns and folds. My technique is to do 2 letter folds. You do the fold, you rest, you bring it back, you turn the dough, the turn, lengthwise towards you, you roll it again, you do another letter fold, let it rest, bring it back, long side towards you, roll it out, book fold, let it rest until you're ready to roll. So usually in that case, once I have finished all my folds, let's get back to this because I'm going to have to finish up this dough. Screw it. I'll start there. So I let this rest overnight. So it's a few days. It's a few day project. I know it's a pain. But for best flavor, you want to let it rest overnight. Minimum 2-3 hours. Okay, let's go. Any questions? We're going to start rolling dough. Lauren, ask a question.
You're asking about how do you feel about chocolate croissant dough? A bakery there, Charlottesville, makes double chocolate, but it doesn't yield that much chocolateness, and with cocoa alter the recipe.
What it does is that the cocoa does, and so the question is, how do I feel about double chocolate croissant, which is when you add cocoa to the détrempe. And I'm fine. If your dough works well that way, that's fine. I would agree with Lauren that it doesn't really give you much flavor for the amount of hoo-ha that you're spilling about having this double chocolate thing. The type of cocoa you use would make a difference. So if you use a Dutch, you would need to use Dutch to get the color. You could use a black cocoa to get super color and more flavor. But I tend to think that for what you lose in the dexterity of your dough, it's not worth adding cocoa to it. I just shove more chocolate in the middle. I mean, that's the better part too, because as Lauren just attested, it doesn't give you much flavor punch. So, but you know, I know Robert, a baker, what is his bakery? Duck something. Fantastic. He makes a baked, well, I'll tell you later. Cronuts are fried. Croissants are baked, but he does a cronut-shaped double chocolate croissant. That is gorgeous. He gets great lift. I'm sure it has great flavor. So totally up to the baker and bakery. Okay. Another question. Yes, you can. So the question is, can you use sourdough starter in the dough? And yes, you can. And sometimes, but I would still. I don't have a formula in front of me. I would still use instant yeast for maximum punch. The sourdough would add a lovely flavor. And that's what I used to do, and I don't have the formula off the top of my head. But yeah, you can. So I don't know if you'll notice, that this is half of a, go ahead, this question?
Can you rest the dough more than a day in the fridge?
I wouldn't go any longer, and then it will kind of overextend its welcome. It will develop too much.
And then
you can freeze it though.
you can't.
You can freeze it. You can freeze it. You just have to be careful with your rest and thaw in the fridge. Probably overnight is best. So if you go too long, it is a very slow process of fermentation. It'll continue fermenting in there, and I can smell. I don't know if you can tell. This is a pâton. When you're finished with it, this is half a pâton, which is the dough block with the layers of butter in there. You see those? And this one is made with barley. That's why it's a little darker.
Why did you change to a book fold versus the letter fold for the last turn?
For the last turn, I used a book fold because I found that instead of doing one more letter fold, the book fold yields more layers per fold. And that was exactly the amount I ended up needing for my perfect dough. So I used to do 4 letter folds, and sometimes it would get over laminated and you would lose the lamination through over lamination. So I found that if I just did that one last and third book fold, I got the proper amount for me. This is my formula, so somebody else will have different numbers, sizes, you know, the different measure of how much butter and how thin and how you lock it in. That's all different for different people. But I found for my formula, that's what worked. So this is half a pâton, and the pâton is what it's called, or as I like to call the dough baby. When the dough and the butter are totally done, you've got a pâton. And this is half of one. I baked off the other half. And I don't know if you saw, it was domed a little because it had risen in the refrigerator. And what it's called is it's called retarding a dough. When you have it in the refrigerator, because it's still fermenting, it's still coming to life, but far more slowly because it's colder. So now I'm going to roll this out. And it's giving me a hard time because it's cold, but not because it hasn't rested. I don't see any shrink back. It's just a nice workout. And at my pastry shop, we didn't have a sheeter. So, muscles. You got muscles. And I tend to roll out my croissant a little more thickly than not. So in this case, I can put a little flour down because I'm not laminating anymore. I just want to make sure I have my brush ready to brush off any excess flour. Any questions? This is the time to ask. Okay. So I'm.
There's a question.
Go ahead. Quest away.
Have you heard that gluten from Europe does not cause the same issues for people here in the U.S. maybe from GMOs here? Karen Jones asked.
I have heard that. I don't know if it's true.
We have heard one.
So the question is, oh, sorry, I should repeat the question. So the question is, had I heard that the gluten in the flour does not cause the same distress that the gluten in the flour here does? I had heard that, but I don't know from personal knowledge. I know nothing, but I have heard that. I have not heard from anyone with celiacs or with a gluten intolerance that it is in fact true. So if anybody out there can speak to this question, whether the gluten in Europe doesn't have the deleterious effects that gluten in the United States has, please give us a little insight into your life. So I'm rolling this out for regular old plain croissant. Ray's showing me the time. I'm just going to keep doing this until I'm done. Don't rush me, man. Yeah, I'll tell all our affiliates. Our programming may run over the scheduled time. We're going into overtime. We're a shootout. I'm going to start scoring goals left and right. So I'm trying to get this to about between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch thick. And I'm going to make traditional croissant shapes. And I like it 10 inches long. I had my tape measure here somewhere, but I'm going to pretend that this is 10 inches long. I tend to roll things too thickly just because I like I like monster croissant, but I think if you're starting this and you want more out of your dough, you're going to want to err towards 1/8 of an inch thick in rolling. So let's just do this really quickly. You can use, we'll do a couple things with this. So you can use one of these, which is a croissant cutter, and you'll see here it has what I'm going to be making by hand. It's a little nip at the end of the dough. I'll show you what that does. You can use one of those. I find that they dull over time, and I'd rather have a sharp edge. So you want to use an incredibly sharp knife, and I'm aiming for about 3 inches at the bottom. Yes, it's long. You don't have, well, that's like 4 inches. Hello. And yes, these are really long. You don't have to make yours this long. This pâton of dough will make about 20 croissants, so it could make double that amount if you didn't make such monsters. This will also take longer to proof, which I will explain.
If she can place pieces of chocolate in this croissant dough.
Well, yeah, and I will show you what the traditional shape is for that. Up next. Oh, geez Louise. The question is, can you put chocolate for pain au chocolat in this dough? And yes, indeedy, we will be doing that too. And you could put, so for this is a traditional shape for plain or filled with, say, jam or almond. I'm going to trim this like this, and you're going to go, what a waste, but it's not. I'll show you why. And now I'm going to make this little notch. I'll show you why in a second. So I'm going to show you a little test. This is what I look for in a dough. Let us hope that this works right now. I want it to be rubbery, because what I do is I want it to stretch, because I always stretch it. And I don't want it to break. And that means it's well formed. How pretty. So you can see it's gotten even longer than when I rolled it out. That's what I'm telling you. I use a lot of dough for a very few croissants, and you don't have to. So then you take this and you spread it a little, not too much. And then as I go, I continue stretching. And then I got this. I'll put this here.
What's the best way to proof the dough at home?
So at home, what I recommend for anyone, so the question is, how do you proof dough at home? Here's the deal. With croissant, I recommend that you put it in a room that is kind of chilly and let it ride. I have been known to proof a croissant up to 5 to 6 hours. Today, my croissant took 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours, because it was a little warmer in here. But one thing that is really crucial, especially with plain croissant, as you see, as I'm doing this, I'm going to slap myself in the face. You can do it like this too. But it never comes out evenly. Don't try this at home, kids. You'll find, look at all this dough in the middle, right? There's a lot going on in there. This is pretty thick. And that's going to take a while to come to proof. The outside will probably get nice, and these edges will get nice and poofy before the inside does. And if you try to force the proof too quickly by making it too warm, then you will have an inside that hasn't yet come to full proof and the outside that has, and that's when you find that the structure of your croissant is very dense and unlifted in the middle. And that's a lot of patience. So I really recommend doing a relatively cool proof for croissant so that it's very important for the lamination. You went through all that work. Just take a little more time to allow it to proof and rise properly. Don't overproof it. So that's why it's nice to do it at a cooler temperature to avoid overproofing, so that then it could collapse in the fridge too, because you've just gone too far.
Megan wants to know did you brush?
Megan wants to know if I brushed, and I didn't need to. I didn't see any. I brushed and flossed today. Yes. So sure. No. Yes. I didn't have to, because I saw that I put so little flour in there. I didn't need to. But yes, thank you, Megan. If you are going to be using flour, you would want to make sure that you brush off any excess that you've got. So at this point, I'll show you if you were going to put, I like to put almond paste or jam sometimes in there. So I would put a little strip right here. I would lay it right, so let's pretend this is a little almond paste. I would go bloop. And some people do put these extra pieces of dough in there to give it more heft. I don't, because I think that impedes a good rise. I think then your proof time will be longer. I'm like, dude, just do what God gave you and stretch it, roll it, proof it, be patient, be patient, be patient, be patient. Okay, I'm going to show you what to do with those little errant pieces. You can use a muffin tin. I have these. A little sugar. You can add cinnamon. And then I take these pieces and I toss them in the sugar and cinnamon. Fill it up pretty full. And then let that proof as well. It proofs pretty quickly because the sugar is hygroscopic and it starts taking the moisture out and it really is feeding the yeast. So this will proof before the rest of your croissant will. So you'll have a snack as you're waiting.
Okay. Lori asked, is the notch in the dough to set the shape better?
Well, yes, what it does is that so the question is, does the notch in the dough set the shape better? And what it does indeed. So you don't have to make so wide a triangle. And you can still get more size on the edges. You also create a little air in the middle where it takes the longest to proof. So you're going to see, you've got this little notch, and then it stretches these little puppers. So there is a bit, I wouldn't say it's a controversy. So traditionally, plain croissants made with all butter are straight, and those croissants made with another fat or shortening are curved. So that is what legend says. Mine are straight because, as you can see, I make such dumbos that I couldn't curve them if I tried. So I'm not doing it because I am entering the controversy, though I do. I believe they should be straight.
My two.
Yeah.
Some clarification.
Clarify away. Ask your question.
Question is, you said to rest and refrigerate the dough overnight after folding your dough for best results.
Correct.
Can you clarify? Let her fold, then refrigerate overnight? Let her fold, refrigerate overnight? Book fold, refrigerate overnight?
Okay. So what you're going to do, when you do your folds, up to getting your pâton, which is your finished dough, is you make your fold, your letter fold, you refrigerate for no more than 20 to 30 minutes. You take it out, you do your next letter fold, refrigerate again, 20 to 30 minutes, no more. Then you do your book fold, you cover, and then you put it in overnight. You must finish all of your turns within a specified amount of time before you let it rest. That overnight rest is after you've already made your dough baby, it's done, it's had all of its folds, it's ready to go to bed and take a nap until it's ready to fold out like this. But you must complete all those folds in order to have proper lamination, and you must complete all of those folds before it goes to rest for more than 30 minutes, 30, 40 minutes. Some doughs, when it's really hot, can take more time in the fridge, but that's the general time that I go for. So let's do a really quick chocolate croissant. And so you'll notice my chocolate has bloomed, which means that it's got this white film on it. It got a little hot in my kitchen. That does not mean you can't use it. It's still good chocolate. It's just out of temper. That's another class all together. So this is chocolate. I put chocolate about 3 inches into the dough. I cut the dough so that it's a little thicker on one end than the other. And I smush it down a little. Turn this over, pull, and pull, 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 chocolate croissant. They make a very specific chocolate for croissant called bâton. So the dough baby is called a pâton, the chocolate is called bâton, and I think you can get it on Amazon. And it's this wonderful chocolate that comes in long little strips so that you just place it on there, and it has a very high melting temperature so it doesn't flow out, but neither do these. I use Cayabo Cocoa Berry. This is the one I use. Question, ask.
Is there any pan prep or is parchment paper alone sufficient?
Parchment sufficient. Parchment sufficient, and what I do, once I have filled my pan, these are going to double, almost triple in size before they're ready. So I'm going to make sure that there's plenty of room between them. Sometimes, if I've been working for a long time and they've been uncovered, I do a spritz, very light, and then I cover with some of this. And then that's when I let it rest, not in a hot kitchen. If your kitchen is really hot, put them in a room that is the coolest you can find it. Put them in the basement if you have to. But I like it a little cooler than room temperature in order for proofing. And I know that is such a pain to you, but I am telling you, if you take your time, if you've had a lot of missteps in croissant where the middle isn't getting that lift that you want in the layers, it's smushed, it is most often, it could be lamination, but it's very likely that you just rushed the proof and it wasn't fully proofed all the way through. And in order to get that so that it's not mushy and melty on the outside or melty in general, it needs to be a cool room. Bill Starr's in the house. So, go ahead, Bill.
Do you cover the dough while it rests for 20 to 30 minutes?
Say it again?
Do you cover the dough while it rests for
Yes.
20 minutes?
You'll cover. Yeah, always cover. Always cover. So when you're doing your folds, always cover your dough because it could form a skin. And if it does, as you're rolling it out, it starts crackling and it'll get these really gross hard bits. It's disgusting. So this is proofed, maybe a little overproof, but I just let them sit out so you could see what it would look like. So this is what you go for. You know, there's that test where it bounces back, but really, I look for jiggle. Jiggle it just a little bit. You can see my hydration aspects. Everything that I did in this dough, I will mark down.
Maureen has a question if you could make ham and cheese using this dough.
You can use ham and cheese using this dough. I usually do this shape. And like the chocolate croissant, I'll put the ham and cheese like so, right on this portion of the dough, right here. Fold this over. Let's say this is our ham and cheese. Ham and cheese. Ham and cheese. And then just go, maybe you want more ham and cheese than that. And then go, ham and cheese. And this tends to proof more quickly because you don't have as much dough that is kind of bunched up in the middle as a plain croissant. So I do a very gentle egg wash. My egg wash is just egg, no water. And if you can see, as I'm brushing it, look how, I want to get rid of that, but see how like this is ready to rumble. This is like a croissant that wants to be in the oven so badly. And it might have gotten a little warm because the top layer of dough, you can see on this one, tore away a little because I had a hot sheet pan on top of it. That's why I always say cool environment, and then I don't follow my own rules. But you see, can you just see that jiggly jiggly? That is what you want to see. And then let's put it in the oven. And here is a little trick. I just forewarn you, I've heard somebody crack their oven glass doing this, but I've done it in my home oven, it was fine. I'm going to really quickly steam. So this is at a 375 oven. Check your oven temperature. If your oven temperature is too low, sometimes the butter will start leaking out, and that's not where you want to find out that your oven temperature isn't right. 15 to 20 minutes. So set the timer. Don't open the door before it starts to brown, otherwise they could collapse. They haven't set their shape. And now you can make, if you also make this croissant dough, you can use a donut cutter and you can make cronuts like that. Same dough, same dough. You just roll it out to the same thickness, between 1/4 to an 1/8 inch thick. Stamp it out with a donut cutter. Let it rest. It doesn't need to rest that as long, maybe an hour, 2 hours. It doubles its size, but it's just like a nice and flat sheet, so it tends to proof more quickly. And I fried at 350 degrees like a couple minutes on the first side, like 30 seconds on the second side. Let it drain and then dredge it in sugar and fill it with whatever the heck you want. And let's cut into this one. Let's see what happens. Let's hope we got good structure. If I don't, I won't show it to you. Oh, that's nice structure all the way through. And so this is one that is made with, it's a little dense. Probably could have used a little more rice. And this one is made with barley. You can see like the color of it is a little different between the two. And that's made with barley, which gives it a really interesting, nice flavor. Chocolate, tarts, croissant. So if you have any more questions, you can always write me after this. But thank you so much for joining me. I had so much fun making croissant with you. Have a great Labor Day. Bye.